Welcome to Work Life by Design. I'm your host, Mel Marsden. As a passionate entrepreneur with a desire to create places where people and business thrive, I hope to inspire you to find your place at work and in life so you can live a life by design. You'll hear stories of transformation, exploring everything from organisational psychology to brand, and identifying opportunities in your workplace and your life to inspire your human potential. So, let's get started. With 130,000 associates operating in 80 countries across the globe, as a private, family-owned business, Mars Inc. is motivated by the freedom to build a better tomorrow today. And at the core of this is their understanding that the health and well-being of their associates, which is how they refer to their employees, is what really matters to see this happen. Today's guest is Dr. Gary Webb, Mars Inc.'s Regional Health and Wellbeing Manager for Asia Pacific, Latin America, the Middle East and Africa, as well as a member of the Mars Inc. Global Health and Wellbeing Centre of Excellence and Leadership Team. As a former consultant to the World Health Organization, Gary has 20 years' experience in workplace health across Australia and the global market. He has worked as a mentor to many workplace health and wellbeing professionals in Australia over the last 10 years and also works as a volunteer across a number of community, schooling and sporting organisations. As you'll hear in today's conversation, Gary is a passionate advocate for the establishment and execution of holistic health and wellbeing initiatives across organisations that are embedded to enable real change and the operational and leadership shifts that are required to effect it. In today's chat, Gary and I discuss what makes Mars Inc. one of the world's great places to work and the role that an embedded culture of health and wellbeing has had on this continued success, the various initiatives that Mars have, not only around improving the lives of their associates, but also much more broadly the world, and the freedom that being a privately owned business has given them to enable this. How COVID has impacted the workplace and the variabilities across continents and cultures in supporting employees to stay safe and well, and the opportunities that we can all embrace as we begin to look forward to the future of work and the role that health and wellbeing will play in its design. As Gary says in our chat, when well-being is executed holistically, you don't need to measure ROI, you can feel it and see it. Some great insights in this conversation about the surrounding considerations that give us all the permission to see embedded health and wellbeing become a reality. So welcome, Gary. Thank you so much for joining me on the Work Life by Design podcast.
Thanks, Mel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Gary, you are the Regional Health and Wellbeing Manager for Asia Pacific, Latin America, Middle East and Africa at Mars Incorporated. Can you give us a little bit of context about your role and what that includes? Because that's quite a big portfolio that you're managing there.
Essentially, my role is to support the health and wellbeing of our associates across all of those regions. I think it's about 50 odd countries that we serve in those regions, pretty much rest of the world outside of North America and Europe. And essentially anything that is health and wellbeing related. So that looks at everything from proactive wellbeing initiatives. It looks at things like injury management, occupational health in our factories, supporting those who are out on our road in field sales. So anything that looks at it from a health management, an occupational health or a wellbeing perspective would all fit in my role. As part of that role, I'm part of a global centre of excellence for health and wellbeing. So we essentially have three regions. My region, then we have a European region and a North America region. And so we operationally manage each of our regions, but collectively we come together as a leadership team to essentially to help diagnose, develop and design, health and wellbeing interventions that will, serve our customers to support, and there are some things that we can drive on a global scale, but definitely there are local solutions for local problems as well.
And Mars is quite invested in ensuring that the health and wellbeing of their people is at the forefront from what I understand as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, prior to Mars, I was a consultant for about 10 years and I worked for about 40 or so Australian companies. And so I had the pleasure of going in and working and partnering with a number of organizations. And I remember the very first day I walked into Mars, I was a consultant, and there was just this buzz about the workplace. And I remember just going home and telling my wife at the time, hey, you want to get a job at Mars? This place is awesome. And then, she says she essentially held the mirror up and said, well, why don't you? And then there was an opportunity that came up soon after. So what was it? I mean, one, there was this buzz in this environment. Everyone was just engaged and energized and generally loving where they were working. And I remember going to lunch, and it was this huge celebration, right? It was this huge social element, social role of food that they were celebrating. And in talking with the leadership there, they just got it. They understood what it would take to embed health and well-being in the culture. And having exposure to so many industries and so many organizations, to sort of identify one that really stood out for me, and then have the opportunity to join and be able to influence from the inside, has been a great journey.
Oh, that's so exciting to hear. But many organizations talk about implementing health and wellbeing into their businesses, but Mars has really walked the talk in this respect. What is it about health and wellbeing that Mars have really understood, and how does that impact on the business? Because I presume that they've actually seen a business return as to why they've continued to invest down this path. And, as I said, many organizations talk about this, but it's sometimes difficult for them to put the rubber to the road. What's made it different at Mars?
Yeah, really good question, Mel. And let me answer the latter bit first. I remember in the first couple of years of being there, we went on to win a Hapier Award back in the day. And I remember doing some return on investment, analysis and presenting it to the leadership team. And I got about 30 seconds into it, and they said, Gary, we don't need to hear this. We feel it. We see it. We don't need you to show us numbers to justify what we're doing. And that really talks to the strength of the culture and how they understand that well-being is a must. It's not a nice to do. I remember doing an exercise with a number of leadership teams all over the world. There was 11 countries, and I asked the leadership team just 1 minute on a post-it note just to write down, why is it that we should invest in health and well-being? And there was this overwhelming response, was because we care. And that was across 11 different markets. It was just exercise that we did over a course of around a week or so. And that really sort of then helped to sort of set us up. We're invested in the company, and, we have an associate concept, and we ask a lot of our associates, to allow us to be competitive in our markets. But in return, we get a lot. And I think another cool thing to understand about Mars is very much a principle-based business. We have our 5 principles, which are grounded in every way that we operate. And they're more than just words on the wall. You live them and breathe them in everything we do, in quality, in mutuality, in responsibility, and efficiency and freedom. So there is definitely a mutual benefit in investing in associate health and wellbeing. Not only is it great for our associates and their families, but there's also a mutual business benefit in that people are more engaged, they're more productive, generally, and that creates a great environment for people to work in. But also we have a responsibility, create environments that support the health and wellbeing of our associates. So it's about recognizing, in the early days, that there is some core things that we must do, but then recognizing at the other end of the scale that there are benefits. And work in the consulting industry, you can almost plot workplaces on a timeline as to where they are, whether they're serving at the compliance end, or then they're moving more towards, aging workforce or engagement, or, trying to create a value proposition or a tack trail. And then right at the very end of the curve, you have these workplaces that just get it. And it's about all of it. It's about relationships. It's about how well people connect together. It's about resilience. I mean, now so many people working from home, that creates new challenges. And so to create an environment that sets people up for success. So that's from a leadership perspective. But I think the other thing about Mars is it's not about, and what we do have on-site gyms, it's not about an on-site gym. It's not about a yoga class, or it's not about, a nutritional talk. All these things are great, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is about getting that culture right, getting our workplace environment where people can thrive in, both physically and mentally. And a lot of that is, based in things like engagement and creating great places to work. And, so wellbeing is integrated in part of that. But I think, working as a consultant previously, people would try and bolt wellbeing on with the intent of trying to influence, when in actual fact, what they should have been trying to do is actually invest back in creating that engaging culture. If you look at, Maslow hierarchy of needs, or, some of the stuff that's come out by Gallup, or there's plenty of publications, but getting those things right, where you create an environment where people actually, they're earning, an affordable wage, and they're then, working in an environment where they actually enjoy coming to work. Those two things alone go, miles towards, helping people's well-being. But then on top of that, we then invest a lot in our people, in developing people and skills, and because of that, there's this continual sort of growth and development mindset at Mars, and we like to challenge the status quo. We do like to invest in these things where we know that there's a return, not just for the business, but more so for our people.
Yeah, and I mean, it's lovely to hear that that's really taken such a centre stage. And, I'm not sure if many people know that, but Mars is still a privately owned, family owned business. Founded in 1911, so we're 100 years old now. You've got 130,000 what you call associates, and you're working across 80 countries. I mean, it is a massive organisation, and to have health and wellbeing at such a core principle for the organisation to focus around, it's just wonderful to see that you're not a large corporate. You've still got those very much family-owned values that sit at the heart of the business.
And what's great about it is, because we are family owned, we get to make long-term decisions. And I think, having been with Mars now for 10 years, I've seen how that has played out, where we can, invest in things long-term that we believe are going to do the right thing by our people, and of course the communities that we serve. It's interesting. Yeah, we are definitely, and we're growing, right? I think now, as a business, we have more veterinarians now in our business than any other sort of profession. So very diversified across a number of countries. We're actually in the process right now of diving into and renewing our global strategy for health and wellbeing. So we launched a global initiative about 4 years ago, where we centered our global strategy around 3 core elements, which were nourish, which was largely to do with our work environment, site and physical and cultural environments. Energize, how do we energize our people? And then the last thing was about thrive, and how do we create equipped associates, with everything that they need so that they can thrive in their career and their life. So that was the original strategy, which we're just, going through right now. And while many of that still remains relevant, with COVID coming in and challenges to the way that we work, it's a good opportunity for us to pause and reflect and look at, well, what are the challenges moving forward, and how do we make sure that we're making the right decisions and investing in the right programs to help continue to set people up for success. So we're looking at the moment is how we can essentially reach and have the biggest impact. How can we ignite a movement, in this new world in which we live in, and then how do we make sure that we're integrated well within systems? And I think that's one thing we do really well at Mars. We have some amazing people and organisation, HR related signature processes that I think really do underpin a lot of the strength of the culture and our investment in health and wellbeing. So how do we make sure that health and wellbeing is integrated in all of those processes, such that regardless of whether you're joining the business or about to join the business, right through your whole career, there are multiple touch points where you can be engaged in health and wellbeing on a daily basis.
So it's a really multifaceted approach that Mars are taking. And, you guys have been recognised in the Great Places to Work numerous times across multiple countries. What do you think some of the success is that sits underneath that encourages your associates to continue to vote you so highly that you continue to make it back into the Great Places to Work list?
We've had plenty of people come into the business and try and discover, well, what is the secret sauce at Mars
Where is it? Where's the
that makes it such a great place to work? Yeah. So I think that, again, that investment in people is so important. I think we're very big on listening. We have a lot of forums in place where we actually we really value the voice of our associates, and we listen and we grow and adapt. And I think we recognize that, the world is evolving and we need to evolve as well. And the only way that we can continue to evolve and stay relevant as a great place to work is to constantly pause and listen and reflect and look for opportunities for us to continue to grow, to make sure that, we're creating those right environments. Now, there's plenty of surveys out there that, will say it's around this or around this, but I think with Mars it's much more than surveys. I remember when Martin Seligman published a book a few years back called Flourish. He spoke about a PERMA model, things like positive experiences, engagement, relationship, meaningful life, and accomplishment. And even books like that, when I pick up, I go, oh, let me just go and do an audit in Mars, or don't the word order, but basically go in and just say, let's look at a life, or a day in the life of Mars, whether that be a factory associate or a field sales associate, and look at how they, and this is me from a wellbeing perspective. I'm always looking for what else could we be doing, and so I like to be across the science. And so when someone like Martin Seligman, who's a very big name in the industry, from a happiness perspective, comes out and looks at new models, and naturally I'm going to look at it and go, well, how relevant is this? And are there opportunities for us to close any gaps? And I remember remember doing that and just going, oh, wow, it's all these other things that aren't necessarily captured in things like some of those other more traditional surveys, but there's so much more to it. But a lot of it is around absolutely around the culture and investing in people and valuing everybody and what they bring. And I think very big on diversity and inclusion, very big, as I said, on listening and learning, engagement. We invest a lot in impact planning and team engagement plans and high performing collaboration and all these things that allow us to have ways of working which are conducive of a great place to work.
You've mentioned culture there a couple of times. Now, culture is this sort of ephemeral thing that is, what we feel. But I'm curious to know, when you say, we're building a really good culture at Mars, what does that actually mean to you guys? What is it that you see? How would you define culture, and how would you define the activities or the actions or the initiatives that Mars are taking to really focus on enhancing and improving the culture on a continual basis?
When we look at trying to embed certain wellbeing goals into the culture, I'll look at it from three different angles. It's less around products. Quite often I have third parties that will come to me and say, hey, look at this greatest, latest, and they just don't get it, unfortunately. But it's around, you can have the greatest product in the world, but if you apply that across 100 sites, you will invariably get different results. And therefore, it's less around the product and more around the processes that essentially support it. So when it comes to well-being, particularly in culture, I look at it from three angles. One, we look at it from an associate lens. What is it the associate needs in order for them, to support them to, essentially thrive in that cultural element that we're trying to achieve. The second thing would be, what is the physical and cultural element? I mean, physical environment, cultural meaning more like that line management sort of type, sort of that permission that exists. And then that third piece would definitely be around leadership and management practices. What do we need? And even COVID is a really good example of this. There's an ask of our associates, to, be safe and, abide by certain new processes that have come in, and that's an associate literacy and also efficacy. I think efficacy is the one piece that many organizations miss. Is it's not just around literacy, but how do we actually build confidence in people and their ability to act. The second piece is that environmental piece. How do we make the healthy choice the easy choice? And then that last piece is around the leadership, and leadership is everything from investment, but it's also about behaviors. And three big behaviors I'm a fan of, particularly when it comes to healthy leadership, are advocacy, role modeling, and permission. And many organizations get the advocacy piece right, but it's easy to advocate for something and then role model something different. And so if you're truly invested in creating a wellbeing culture, advocacy needs to be supported by role modeling. It's more than just that, because it's also about permission. And permission is, it's normally implied, but people don't always feel they have permission to act on certain things. For whatever reason, they will have their own preconceived barriers as to why I can't do that. And I remember some of the boot camps that we used to have, and I started around 3:00 in the afternoon. I remember the leadership team would quite often go out to them, and they would come and sit back at the desk in their spandex and their exercise clothes. And it was really great. It's something as simple as that. Not only did it advocate, but the role modeling, but just the fact that they went back to their desks afterwards in their exercise gear, did a lot to create this element of permission. And you would just see this shift in, what people were wearing to work, and people would, this groundswell of people who are going out and trying exercise stuff. So there's just little things like that, right? It's not just about putting the program in place, but it's what goes on around it. And so whenever we're trying to implement a new program, I will typically look at it more from behind the scenes as to what else needs to be going on here in regards from a leadership perspective, what else needs to be going on in the physical environment before we even get to then rolling out that associate, so that when we are coming at it from a lens, it's a holistic approach. Now, that's not to say that individual programs by themselves won't have an impact, but if you want to get the biggest return, you look at it and go, what else does this need to really sort of give it the edge, and to the point where even people in my team, they would know that they, when we're rolling something out, would be to engage leaders first of all, onboard them, understand what we're trying to achieve, get all their buy-in and support, then, create those environmental shifts that need to occur. And then when we are then going out to associates, the environment, both physically, culturally, is then set up to help support what we're asking of our associates.
Yes, it's really having that consistency across all those touch points, because I know from the work that we do with organisations as well is really understanding what are those strategic initiatives, and then how does the actual physical environment either give the appropriate cues that is, those permissions that this is an acceptable form of behaviour, or what I often see is the physical environment is actually contradicting all of those strategic objectives that the organisation has gone out and set up to do. So I think it's really great that you guys have identified that actually is a big part to play in ensuring that people have those enabled with those permissions to be able to go forth and behave in that particular way.
Yeah, and there's lots of things you can do in the physical environment. I'm sure you've heard of Nudge. Therapy,
Yes.
a great book, but those little
Yep.
nudges, even little things like stand-up desks, right? We've done stuff where everyone's got a stand-up desk at some of our sites, but the tradition would be actually that they lower their desk to help them clean and so forth at night time. Well, for a period of time, what we did was we actually raised the desk so that when people came in, the default was actually that it was at a height that was already set up. It's just interesting to see and just to observe people's behaviours when that exists. If you make that easy choice, the default choice. Now, obviously, people could choose to sit down straight from the outset, but more often than not, people would at least start the day standing. So there's little things that just because you have an environment, those stand-up desks were always there, but just that little bit extra, little nudges that you can put in place that, could definitely make a difference.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Now, look, COVID has clearly impacted our workplaces in ways that, none of us have ever expected. With such a big portfolio, how have you seen the differences in how you've had to manage those workplace environments in dealing with health and safety of your employees? And what are the observations that you've witnessed in terms of the transformation and the way that your employees have or your associates have been responding to the global pandemic?
Yeah, COVID will definitely go down as a bit of an asterisk, I think, one to remember. My background is in public health, and prior to Mars, I worked for the WHO, and so I did a lot of consulting in some, things like infectious disease and so forth. And so to be able to come into an organisation like Mars, when COVID had sort of hit, I was already in the business, but they got it from the very early days, and they understood how big and important this would be. And they gave our team a lot of permission to try and help support them. And we had a relatively small global organisation when you look at the size of Mars. And we had to, in the early days, be quite prescriptive around some of our interventions. So we developed playbooks in the early days. China is one of my largest markets, and I remember being at the Australian Open tennis in a semi-final, and my phone was. I knew that there was some crisis management team meetings that were going on in China, to the point where I had to leave the fifth set of that semi-final. I just like, what, I couldn't ethically. I felt compelled to go and help because I knew what was going on, and that was by choice. And but yeah, working with China in those early days, China, things happened very, very quickly. I remember developing protocols and having them ready by end of today, but by the start of tomorrow, that had already been, completely almost superseded. And my former boss, he had a great sort of analogy, and he said, "Don't let great get in the way of good." And I didn't quite understood what he meant in the early days, but I think when it comes to COVID, because of the fast moving nature of it, you could invest that extra couple of hours to really sort of polish something. Or if it was good enough and it was essentially covering off all the necessary bases, get it out there, because chances are it's going to be superseded anyway. And that's so we acted quite quickly. And, given that not everyone is a health professional, and a lot of markets in the early days, governments weren't necessarily acting in the same way to what we were seeing in places like Australia. I mean, Australia, we've had some ways, but, by comparison to other markets, we have, had a pretty good ride so far as COVID is. And so from a perspective, what goes on in other markets, crazy things where authorities would come in and shut places down and lock, keep people huddled together in places for 3 or 4 days in the fear that something could spread. And, what they don't realize is that in actual fact could be spreading. So, there's lots of challenges that we had. And so we had to be quite prescriptive in what our interventions would be. And we try to keep it relatively simple, and we created these playbooks, but, make it really clear around, what the expectations were. And it's been amazing, and it really does make me proud to work for Mars, seeing how much they have invested in associate health and wellbeing, particularly during the COVID time, not just in protecting associates and family and our community and customers in regards to COVID, but also recognizing that COVID creates additional challenges. It creates isolation for people working at home. People are juggling now, kids at home, working from home. And so there are other things that we need to be doing from a wellbeing perspective. And what's been really great is to see almost that doubling down of investment in health and wellbeing to help people to get through. In regards to markets, you're right. Every market is different, and a lot of our Asian markets are fairly similar in that the governments will act relatively quickly to try and limit the curve. In other markets, however, places like India, parts of Middle East Africa, and definitely Latin America, it's much more widespread in the community, and you will have real cultural challenges across markets in places like Latin America, for example. Close contact is everything about what they do. It's not uncommon to come to work and everyone sort of hugs one another, and it's almost like this whole line, you've got to go around and hug everyone in the office type sort of, that's just culturally what happens in. And so in those types of markets, to try and break down some of it has been a little bit more challenging. In some markets, like Indonesia is one that has quite high vaccine hesitancy, even for things like, the vaccines that we would have in Australia, the MMRs, all those types of childhood vaccines, they've got quite high vaccine hesitancy rates there. And so there's been a lot of investment in the last couple of years at a community level to try and raise vaccine literacy and efficacy. And so we've had to do a lot in certain markets to sort of make people feel safe, educate them about vaccines and to be able to support them, providing access to them and their family. In some markets, we're quite fortunate again here in Australia that vaccines are freely available, but in other markets, places like Egypt and stuff like that's not always the case.
Yeah, so you've been dealing with a number of different challenges across all these different markets.
Yeah.
Has there been any particular workplace challenges that you've needed to deal with from a cultural perspective? Because I know that, working rhythms are different in different locations. And how has that played a role in, working from home and hybrid working and the things that we've needed to do to kind of manage our way through the situation to date?
Yeah, let me sort of look coming up from a slightly different angle. I think from a COVID perspective, we've managed it really, really well, and associates understand and have adopted. I think we were very quick in the early days to embrace hybrid working and look at it as an opportunity. I mean, there can be some real well-being benefits to hybrid working, and you're no longer commuting, and you can flex your time to some extent. There's obviously some challenges with it, which you need to try and manage and build the right environment to support that. But I think probably one of the key challenges for COVID now is, although in Europe right now we're seeing a huge wave going through Delta right now in Europe. I mean, we heard about Omicron this morning in the news, but what people are forgetting about is actually the Delta wave that's currently going through Europe is probably the biggest ever. And so for us, that's probably a little bit more of a concern, at least in the short term. One of the key challenges is, when it is safe to go back to office, how do we get people essentially back, because in the initial stages there was, you go through change, and if you manage change, there's always that element of ambiguity and hesitancy. And, in the early days, hybrid working, some people would have really struggled to adapt to that. And that's not Mars specific. That's just life in general. However, now we're at the stage where we want to, in some markets, it is relatively safe. We have really high vaccination rates, and we want to entice people to come back to the office. And because of the great environments that we create, in many markets, people can't wait to get back in the office. But in some markets, there's still a lot of concern around COVID and a bit of unknown. And so I think from a global perspective, one of the challenges will be, how do we create that right environment that also encourages people? Because I think COVID has scared a lot of people. A lot of it's around timing, so you'll go to reopen the office, but then 3 weeks later, in Europe right now,
You'll get sent home again.
yeah. And so because of this up and down, people are
Mm.
really adjusting to that working from home. And when you adjust to something, then you then need to adjust, and not adjust back, but then adjust to the new.
Mm.
And so again, you've got to go through that whole change management process, raising awareness, desire, all those sorts of things. So and that's, again, it's less around Mars. I'm talking more broadly around, well-being in the workplace. But one of the biggest challenges that I foresee is trying to get to a point where we get back to having full offices again, where you can create that buzz. And it's like going to the gym. When you get there, you'll feel great that you're there, and you'll feel afterwards. But the hardest part is getting there. And I think for getting people back to the office, I think that's a challenge that many organizations will likely face, in the next 6 to 12 months.
And so as we begin to project forward and start to think about what the future of work looks like, what can you share with us around how Mars is starting to approach this, and what key factors are you really looking at to form some of your foundations for your future of work?
So again, we adopted pretty early. We recognised that, it was an environmental cue that essentially, forced the hand a little bit. But I think we were starting to move, progressively towards some of these work patterns anyway. I think so. Hybrid working is definitely something that's here to stay.
Never before have we collectively experienced such change on a global scale. The pandemic, whilst on one hand has challenged us in ways that previously we could have only imagined, on the other, it has opened the doors to incredible opportunity. The opportunity to redesign our work lives in a way that works for us. An opportunity to disrupt, reset, and recreate our new normal. And to help you on this journey, I am so excited to bring to you the Work-Life Lounge. This is your VIP pass to accessing some of the greatest thought leaders in our world of work. So often we are told what we need to do and why we need to do it, but we are often left wondering, but how? How do I make the changes that I need to? And that's where the Work-Life Lounge is here to support you, to guide you step by step through the how, to take back control and design your work life on your own terms. And for the next 3 months, you can have an Access All Areas VIP pass to the lounge, thank you to the sponsorship of Community. Committed to their purpose of fostering the creation of communities where people feel connected, Community is on a mission to ensure that we all emerge stronger together, that we consciously create our work lives on purpose as we head into 2022. Now, there are only 100 seats available under this incredible sponsorship, so to claim your seat in the lounge, head over to melissamarsden.com.au/work-life lounge for more details. I can't wait to see you in the lounge. Now, let's get back to the episode.
I think, what we've seen some organisations do is be quite prescriptive around what that looks like in the office this day and not on this day. Whereas with Mars, what we've tried to do is look at, well, what are the reasons why you want to come to the office? And a lot of that is around collaboration and that culture and that socialisation element, which we really, really value in Mars. We're very much a relationship business. And so how do we make sure that our work environments, when people are there, are set up for success that allow for that socialisation, that relationship, that collaboration that, we really value. Mars has always been, it's no secret, we have open plan offices, we have, and I guess that's where a lot of our buzz and energy comes from, is because we are such a relationship business. What we were seeing in more recent years is that sometimes you do need to focus, and it's about trying to get that balance right around, where you're creating environments where people can focus when they need to. And so we were putting in more focus pods and, some little things in the physical environment that just sort of allow people who needed some space to go and do that. Obviously, we recognise that some people are more extroverted, others are introverted. And so, again, how do we create office environments that are supportive to everybody's needs? And I think with the hybrid working, it's more about recognising, well, what are the tasks that are best done? And it's about working in the right environment that allows you to help set you up for success, both as an individual but from a business perspective. Now, for some people, that may be working in the office every day because the home environment doesn't support. For other people, it may be actually, the way that their work schedule is, that they may do more from home. But I mean, it's getting this combination right, and it's about working with teams to understand, ways of working that are going to help set the team up for success and make it, mutually relevant for all of the team. And there may have to be some give and take as part of that, and that's part of that, the responsibility and mutuality that we have. But I think that's the key thing. Is it's what do you come in the office for? How, what do you work at home for? What are the key tasks? And it's interesting when we look at some of our scores and so forth. We saw this big spike in energy, mainly around our leaders and our senior leaders as a result of hybrid working. That could be that they're not travelling as much and so forth. So we probably saw the biggest impact of hybrid working more so in our senior leaders. Now, for those who are answering phones all day, or in our call centres or whatever it may be, that environment may be a little bit harder, right? So they're the people that may find it more difficult. And so again, how do we cater for all associates? There's no one size fits all, but conceptually it's there, but there's freedom within the framework to understand and to work what would work best for teams, I guess.
And how are you working with individuals to help them determine what activities they come in the office for and what activities they do at home? Is there an education piece that you're working through to support people in making those decisions?
Yeah, we've definitely done a lot of, we've got a lot of guidelines and playbooks and so forth. It's creating environments where it's okay to test and learn. What's relevant today may in a month's time not be relevant. And so I think it's got to be an open door and this constant reevaluate in the same way that we do engagement. Engagement is not about a survey that's done once a year that you then look at results and have a quick conversation. And it's something that it's an every day, it's an every week, it's an every month type sort of conversation. And it's about recognising where people are at and then being able to adjust. And we're still learning as everybody else in this, but I think giving people freedom, some guidance as to what we sort of believe, but then also giving some freedom within that framework to allow people to see what would work best for them. And line managers, they know their teams better than anyone. Obviously, we're sort of confined by the constraints of the role at sometimes, but how do we allow enough freedom in there where there's that element of co-creation, I think, is important.
What about meetings? Because meetings keep coming up as one of the key things for many of the organisations I work with. Is it a Zoom meeting? Is it an in-person meeting? Do we need the meeting? How has Mars kind of approached that whole thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, many sort of like offices, we still need them, and they do absolutely have value in what we do. It's more just, again, how do we set a meeting up for success? Let's not just have a meeting for meeting's sake. Let's really go through a process of understanding why we're meeting, and how can we achieve that in a way that is efficient and respectful of those people who are in there. And it's a good opportunity to challenge, I think, some of the status quo. How do we start to work in ways where we don't necessarily need to get together asynchronously, I think the word is. That with a colleague of mine in the UK, and we were talking around this document and how collectively we would get input from around the world in the next couple of days just by posting it and comments. And so I think we're definitely seeing a little bit more around that. I think the great thing about Mars and the culture is that if things aren't working for individuals, then people typically feel that they have permission to reach out. And so there are meetings that it's okay, for me to question, do I need to be here, or what input can I add? Is there an opportunity for me to provide that in advance? So we definitely respect individual needs and times. I think even little things that we've done, right? A couple of years ago, we implemented a tool called the Meet Smarter tool, where we changed all the default meetings in Outlook to be 25 minutes and 50 minutes instead of 30 and 60. Now, it sounds something quite small and simple, but we did this with a view that how do we give people, make sure that meeting is finishing early, to give people space to freshen up, to close out whatever was in, just creating those moments throughout the day for recovery. We're big on energy, creating energy and sustaining energy. And in order to do that, we also need strategic recovery embedded throughout the day. And so how do we create opportunities for strategic recovery, and just some little environmental things like that we do that just, again, help set people up for success. Now, how they use those 5 minutes to recover is up to them, or essentially it's, again, creating that environment that helps. And some people will naturally do that anyway. They will make 15 or 20-minute meetings, but the intent was, how do we, again, challenge some of the status quo around the way that our time was previously governed by Outlook, whereas now we can sort of have a bit more flex in there and challenge that and go, what, I am going to block in some focus time, or I am going to block in some strict recovery time. How do we make that easy for people, or have it as the default coming into your day?
There's another one of those little nudges, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Push them in the right direction.
Making the healthy choice the easy choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this whole season, Gary, is all about designing a work life that you love. What would you share about how you have consciously designed your work life to be one that you love, and how have you shared that with the people that you work with at Mars?
So my role is a little bit unique in that, there are so many time zones for me, and it works in really quite well. I'm quite an active person, and so I do like getting up early and connecting with my colleagues in the US or Latin America, but then take a few hours back in the morning where I can really invest in spending good quality time with my kids, and, dropping my kids off at school and picking up from school are two of my favourite times of the day. There's just that buzz around it. And so, having the ability to flex my time to sort of fit in some of those things that are really important to me, I think is just a really sort of simple example. Now, the trade-off for that is, I do start early, and naturally when I'm connecting with likes of Egypt and Dubai and South Africa, that's much later in my day. And sometimes I do work in the evenings, but, I can take time during the day to go to the gym or go for a swim. I coach, touch football, and I can tend to, after school, fit that in. So I still have responsibility in quite a large region, and that means that at times I am required to work, what others may consider be after hours. But the trade-off for that is that I actually get time back during the day, and that's an example where it works well for me. But as I said, that role is quite unique. But I think what it does is it talks to people can flex to really sort of look at what are the things that are important to them. Whether that be, the kids play or sporting or whatever. I love this thing. It's great where you have people walking out the door saying, hey, I'm going to go watch my kids play soccer or whatever like that. We know we have things like we call Fridays in Australia where, knock off early on a Friday. If you've done your work, then why do you need to be here? And for me, sometimes that could be a Wednesday, time early on a Wednesday, knowing that at the end of the week, all my tasks. And I think, and this is my own personal view and not that of Mars, but I think watching the future of work, I think more and more will be employed to complete tasks as opposed to hours. If you're good at your job, you may be able to get something done in a more efficient way, whereas for other people, it may take a little bit longer. But I think if I was to sort of predict the future, I think, contracts will be less around how many hours people come to work, particularly for those in sort of white collar type industry. A little bit different when you're blue collar and physically being there on a production line or putting bricks in a house or whatever it may be. But for those who are, at a higher, more senior level, definitely around how can you do what you do in an amazing way, in the most energizing way for you as an individual that does amazing results for the organization. And I think there will be more and more freedoms to be able to flex as to how that gets done.
A lot more outcomes focused, and having that ability to really integrate your work and your life to make a work life that works for you.
Where the challenge exists is where you may have a team where everyone's conflicting as to what works best. And I think that's one of the real challenges for organisations to navigate. And so I think that's where sometimes there needs to be some sort of guidelines that says, and here's the core things we must get right, and then here are the things flex on.
Yeah, agreed. Well, look, Gary, it has been a fantastic conversation today. Thank you for sharing so much insight around your role at Mars and how Mars are really progressing what great work life looks like. If people want to get in touch with you and find out more about Mars or find out more about the work that you're doing, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, thanks, Mel. I mean, obviously LinkedIn is probably the best way for externals to connect with me. I've got an amazing team here in Australia. Daniel Tech, who's our National Health and Wellbeing Manager. Reach out to Daniel. He's really close to everything that's going on here in Australia. He's an amazing guy who's really sort of leading the way and really sort of setting examples here in Australia for the rest of the world to learn from. So, please reach out to me or Daniel. He's a lovely guy, as I said, and we'd be more than happy to sort of share a bit more.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Gary. I really appreciate your time today.
That's all right. Thanks, Mel. It's always a pleasure. Wish everyone a Merry Christmas. Stay safe and be well.
Thanks, Gary.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you for joining me for Work Life by Design. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love you to rate, review, or subscribe, or all three, in iTunes and share it with your friends so we can continue to build this community. I would love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts, questions, or suggestions, you can connect with me on Instagram @Melmar or send me an email at melissa@melissamarsden.com.au. I hope this episode has given you a few sparks of inspiration so you can design a work life you love.